I think it's time that we become a little bit more aware that there are stages in our process of using meditation to arrive at what we call in Buddhism enlightenment. There are several lists of the stages that our practice can go through. Cindy has one. I don't know that we are at that point, but we can certainly work on the second step. The first stage is to establish concentration. Concentration is when the mind becomes focused on an object and it stays there. Sometimes our mind is too busy and it won't stay on one object. And when that happens, I suggest that you become aware of the object other than the object of entry, which for us is the touch sensation. There are two kinds of objects. There's rupa, material object, and there's mental object. The first line in the Dhammapada is often translated to say that everything that happens is determined by the mind. Mind comes first. Mind is chief. Mind is dominant. That's a little simplification. It's not that everything that happens to us is determined by the mind. Primarily what is determined by the mind is whether there is suffering or no suffering. So using the dichotomy of materiality and mental, another word for materiality, and you may have to find your own naming, labeling for this, is senses. We have 5 physical senses. So it's either the mind is sensing or the mind is thinking. So an example of sensing is pain. The equivalent of pain with thinking is suffering. So you can see that suffering resides not in the senses, it resides in thinking. But if we are not aware of the difference between the two, and our experience of life is continuous and we don't know whether what we are conscious of is sensing or thinking, we are more liable to have problems. Because thinking we can change. Sensing, not too much. It can be changed a little bit because sensing actually is largely also thinking. But most of it comes from an external stimulus. In the external world, we can modify a little bit, but the fundamentals oftentimes we cannot. Like sound is sound, touch is touch. We can modify how we experience touch, how we experience sight, how we experience smell. But we cannot really change smell. It's our interpretation of smell that we can alter. So it's crucial that we're able to differentiate between sensing, which is based on external stimulus that comes in contact with the 5 physical sense organs, the skin, eyes, and ears, and thinking. Thinking is what is the object of practice. That is what we can change. So first, we have to differentiate between sensing and thinking. And when you do your sitting, or when you do your walking, really for the rest of the time, be aware of what is the object of your awareness. Is it sensing? Is it thinking? And as much as possible, as we already have said, suffering comes from thinking. For the course of the afternoon, try to sense more and think less. The rest of our lives, we'll think more and hardly sense. So for this afternoon, try to train your mind to sense and recognize the sense and set aside the thinking. There will come a time later on when we can deal with thinking and look at the many ways that the mind thinks. And we can work with those. But right now, just for this afternoon, just be aware when you're sensing and when you're thinking. So you can use the actual label, sensing. Or if you want to, you can do it more complicated. Seeing, feeling, touching, and pain is part of touch. Seeing, touching, hearing, smelling, hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting. And there's taste, by the way, in the mouth, even when there's no food. And when you become aware of a thought, any kind of thought, remembering, judging, interpreting. Judging is very common. Judging is just thinking. It becomes more complicated when we forget that we are just thinking. So, my suggestion for today's retreat is before your mind becomes focused and stable on the object of entry into the jhanas, become aware of the objects that come and go in your mind. When an object arises, is that sensing or is that thinking? And it might be difficult in the beginning because for many of us, those two have merged. And it's hard for many of us to separate the two. Discerning is part of the practice. To discern between sensing and thinking. Because sensing, we can change by moving our bodies through action. But thinking is where enlightenment is. Meditation practice is practice of using the mind to arrive at liberation. So first, we have to be able to know when we are sensing and when we are thinking. It's really very simple, but may not be so simple because we're not used to doing it. And you'll find that this is very useful in the course of your daily life. Am I sensing or am I thinking? If I'm just thinking, it's just thinking. that will, even just learning that skill, will reduce the number of moments of suffering in our lives, and will help us avoid inflicting suffering on ourselves and others. It's just thinking.